And boom, we're back for another episode of Alfacast. I'm Mike Winner, and I'm here as always with Dr. Barre Lando. Today we have a really fun show for you guys, and it's needed more than ever, really, in these times of peril due to good old cerveza virus. Today we're talking about the anatomy of emotion and what that means in terms of how we outpicture our reality. Most people are in emotional overdrive these days with current events, so we thought we'd dissect these things we call feelings and look a bit deeper. We'll draw on everything from ancient Sufi systems of psychoanalysis to biological instincts with some Tesla-level science thrown in for good measure. It's time for the psychology community to get up to speed so humanity can get out of drama and do what we really need to do. You'll never think of emotions the same after today's show, hopefully. So, Barre Lando, I'll let you, how you doing today, first of all, and how are your emotions going?
Good, Michael. Doing good. Everything's great up here. And, we're talking about the weather a little bit because we have a weather front in. It's extended. We're getting some late rain in the year. It's affecting our planting and everything, but we're still welcoming it since Governor Gruesome is already planning our next forest fires in California. So would it surprise anybody to know that emotions are responsible for the weather? In fact, weather is actually a product of the collective emotions of humanity. And that's a fact. So
Wow.
Let's make some other bold statements right off the start here.
Let's
just jump down that rabbit hole already anyway. We are the only creative, self-individualized forces in this realm of experience. This is our playground. We are responsible for everything happening here. And emotions do manifest as the weather. And for the folks that say, well, what about geoengineering? Well, imagine, we have a group of sociopaths that actually want to control us by weather. Well, there's two things happening there. You have whatever the heck's going on in their psyche, and then the rest of us that just put up with it or are in complete denial of it. And so it's all a product of our emotion, and it goes up and down the chain. It's the same old thing. This emotions, the topic might throw people because, well, okay, that's really touchy-feely and cool. And, you get a few people watching that might be interested in that sort of thing. But we're talking about a topic that is the most important subject matter we could possibly discuss. We had another PowerPoint we did a while back that was on contagions, which, understandably seems very relevant compared to relative to current events, but actually emotions are actually more relevant. And in my clinic days, we knew when we were managing cases that people were really in a serious situation, if we didn't get the emotional dimension, and I say dimension because there's only one substance that's basically manifest as waveforms and trillions of waveform vectors that coalesce and create a complex that then we call our body, our physical body. And those emotions are what give the electrical vectors the power to manifest in our body or in our experience altogether. So if we did not take care of that dimension of a person's health, then you always had short-lived success, if any success at all. And relative to current events, if we don't get this emotional component handled, we're done, because that's how we're being handled. That's how this whole farce is being orchestrated and being used against us. So let's just jump right in. Sure. Mike, any comments first?
I was just going to say, it seems like in the modern era, the idea of emotions has kind of been swept aside because we live in such a mental plane these days, where everything is, on Twitter and Facebook, and where all these conversations are happening. One, the paradigm that we're in, it's hard to garner emotion from others on a platform like Twitter, unless someone's throwing it in all caps, they're angry, or you can kind of get a little bit of a sense. But as you said about the weather, because we're all in this together and everything's a matrix of energetics, of informational fields, and our emotions provide that amplitude, right? We are, once again, this schizophrenic species now that has been kind of forced into these technocratic, conditions through the technology, where our emotions are kind of been swept aside while they're the most important. So it leads to this very chaotic kind of confused populace that is just shouting at a wall, really, demanding, like little kids, their voice to be heard, where we are all kind of just lost in that sense, because we don't have that traditional communal face-to-face, in-person connection, where we can then vibe off each other's emotions and have a better understanding where what others' perspectives are, where they're coming from in that moment, because emotions change from moment to moment. I'm sure we're going to go over all this. As a father with kids, I see it in an instant, especially with kids, from extreme happiness to extreme anger in a flash. And when you can kind of ride those waves of emotion and connect with others, as you said, like in terms of the weather, I feel like we have a better grasp on our humanity and a better kind of grasp on reality. So it's really tough. I feel like emotions are, as you said, many people probably roll their eyes and go, okay, good feeling kind of podcast today. But there's a whole science behind it. There's a whole importance that we really need to understand, so that we can move forward in a way that will allow us to re-empower ourselves as consciousness, as this embodiment of the reality that is around us, and so that we can control it better, and that we can formulate it into really what we want to see moving forward. So, Bear, I hope that's kind of where I'm coming from today, and I'm really excited to see what you got for us.
Yeah, very well said, Mike. And would it be surprising to any of us that what we learn about emotions in school, whether we're studying psychology or otherwise, that it's been completely inverted? We are taught that emotions are a product of life events. I had a fight with my girlfriend this morning, so I'm angry or sad. I had a financial disaster, so I'm depressed. No, actually, it's the other way around. Those events are precipitated by our emotions. Emotions are not a product of events. And that's what really throws us as psychologists and practitioners. We're always trying to get into story, not realizing that emotions create story, not the other way around.
It's kind of like the allopaths with looking at symptoms and then applying a pharmaceutical. Same concept, right? It's looking at the after effect and then applying that it's like in the inversion principle we always talk about. Whereas, and this can relate to the abundance, like the podcast we had about generating your own wealth. Your wealth doesn't create your happiness creates your wealth.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to outline here today, and I want to move quickly through these slides because each one of them we could talk for hours, or subjects of entire textbooks. We can expand on them in the future and have plenty to talk about if people are interested. So what we'll do is just highlight certain things. And what I put together is a sequence of slides that is actually what I use clinically in practice when I'm managing bioterrain medicine protocols. And emotions, again, are the largest component. It's when you isolate those, what we call emotional dimensions, it absolutely provides the catalyst for all the other bioterrain medicine to do its work, because that's what will give the velocity for things to change, just like emotions give the velocity for our thoughts to manifest in this universe and create our reality in the first place. So what I would ask for people is, we're going to move through a lot of subject matter quickly. Don't get overly mental or try to understand everything at first glance. Some of you will just get this intuitively right away. And but the main thing is we're planting seeds, we're putting some concepts out, and this does represent real clinical protocols that we that are part of the entire clinical system that I used, that included managing microbiology, the organ systems, and was very multidisciplinary in its approach and very successful. So let's start with a little share screen here. So the first one, the internal weather. What I really hope to just put forth in this whole presentation, if anybody takes anything away from this at all, it's this. We take feelings, we take emotions way too personally. And if we understood them for what they really are, as real electrical forces, one dimension of our entire experience, then we would be able to deal with them much more successfully and not get so attached to them. So let's just make some bold statements right off the start here, and we'll just breeze through these. Mike, if you or anybody in the audience has any questions, just stop me, okay? So first off, mind produces thought. That's pretty basic. I don't think anybody could argue with that. And we do live in a mind-created electric wave universe. So therefore, if mind produces thought, then obviously everything we experience is a product of that thought. And we talk about that all the time. Now, thought becomes an electrical event. It polarizes into electricity. That creates vibrations that then we experience in a three-dimensional intensity to give us this experience. Motion is what we get when the two polarities are bouncing off each other. And the polarities in reality are just seeking balance. That's why sodium seeks chloride. It's two out of balance elements. And when they find each other, they mate and they create a balance. Just like a man and a woman come together, it's two different polarities. They create a balance. Emotion is when you have the velocity, that passion. If you have an idea, for instance, even on the mundane plane here in our conscious life, we want to achieve something or excel in sports, then we don't just sit around and think about it. We develop a bit of a passion about it, and put some effort behind it, and then that creates the velocity so that those energies, those electrical vectors, are put into motion and they manifest. Otherwise, you're not going to have manifestation. We can think and grow rich all we want, but we're not going to grow rich until our thinking is fueled by emotion. And emotions can be of all types. Toxic emotions will also create the intensity for manifestation, which accounts for why the world looks so stupid right now. Now, emotion, and I just kind of do a little play on the spelling here, which is E-motion, is just energy in motion. When things are moving, just like in the physical body, when the lymphatics are moving, when the organs are moving, you don't have problems until you have a stasis, when things reach a standstill or stagnate. And the next little statement here, emotion, when you take the hyphen out, that's what we call not just energy in motion, but those are stagnated emotions, which account for what we think of as our lower toxic emotions and attachments that create all our problems and manifest the things we actually don't want. And it's interesting that our governmental systems, our religious systems, all teach us that we are somehow inherently bad, or that we will do bad things to each other if we don't have a lot of rules or people with guns to enforce those rules. And so from early on in life, we are taught that we need to be controlled. And everybody, I think, appreciates what happens when you try to suppress or control motion. You have a lot of frustration and things just get worse. So emotion is when that normal motion seeking balance stops. You have an inertia, you have a stagnation, just like in a body. It can become a swamp and have or microorganism pleomorphism, overstay its welcome in certain cycles that then become imbalances in microbial populations and create problems that we then call disease. So that is emotion is stagnation and it's imbalance. And as we already suggested, emotion creates story, not the other way around. Story does not create emotion. Now, I can imagine the comments we're going to get on this right away. We're going to say, okay, I was raped or I was abused or some such thing. And how can that not make me feel bad or account for my problems? Well, we're not at all saying that we do need to have a lack of empathy for that sort of occurrence and that we have to account and deal with that sort of situation. But emotion is a product of electrical forces that happen long before we embody this time around in the first place. They're a product of many embodiments, electrical forces that we have put into motion, and those will in fact create all the circumstances in our life, including a lot of the unfortunate ones. That does not at all mean that we're responsible or to blame, but we need support from loved ones around us when bad things happen. But we also need to understand how those forces create our circumstances so that we don't have to repeat them. So the most humanitarian thing you can do is to understand what emotion is, how we're all in the same boat. We bring in a bunch of baggage with us every time we jump into a new body, and these same electrical vectors start happening all over again, and those electrical vectors come with the intensity of the emotions that were in play at those times where we initiated them in the first place.
So,
and we also, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, so in the typical inverted reality we live in, it appears that oftentimes the victimization protocols that we're so subjected to, the emotions, once again, are an afterthought and are an effect from the trauma, as opposed to understanding that this emotion idea is actually generated the trauma to begin with. And this is empowering information because it puts us in the driver's seat of our own reality. And we're not just this lost buoy in the ocean of waves, but we're actually the surfers riding the waves. And if we can control these energetics in a way, I feel like then, just taking that horrendous idea of being a rape victim, and this is triggering to many, especially if somebody's had trauma like this. I think sexual trauma is some of the most impactful stuff on humans' lives. But I guess what you're kind of saying too is that a lot of this outpictures in our reality because of our internal energetics via this emotion. Is that correct?
Correct. And we'll never move forward out of these kinds of traumatic experiences until we understand how it works. Because as long as we have people that are victims, we will always have predators. You're back in the world of polarities. You can't have one without the other. And a lot of people also say in some of our other talks we've had about cancer not being a disease, and then the inevitable comment, well, my mom died of cancer. How can you say such a cruel thing? Well, my mom died of cancer allegedly too. But when we understand more the mechanisms that were in play, then we can work with it, whether it's so-called cancer or whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's an emotional trauma from being abused. Then we can all not only support the individuals affected, but we can also not repeat the same thing, not only in that individual's life, but have them be an example for the rest of us. And I've learned more from my clients than I ever did in school, because until I put things to practical use and then observed the results, it was all academic. So my greatest teachers were those courageous souls that said, you know, I'm not buying the company line. They told me I'm dead anyway, so what have I got to lose? So they jump in both feet on the emotional level in order just to try different, for instance, treatment strategies and, you know, follow it through. Some people are so afraid to stop the conventional treatments that even though they know it's killing them, they're more afraid of not doing it, even though they know they're gonna die from that as well, and it's even gonna be more miserable. So those courageous individuals that say, you know, I'm gonna try something different, even though they're staring death in the face as they think, those are the folks that I owe my learning to, because they walked their talk and they gave me the visual experience that made me think that there's something to all this.
Yeah. And I'm back on the victimization narrative storyline. You know, obviously right now we're seeing that pushed heavily in the mainstream. There seems to be an agenda there, and it's frightening. You're especially seeing this with millennials who have really been captured by this concept that they're all victims. And it's really disheartening because it just really takes away sovereignty. And I find this with family members and friends, and I try to, you know, in a very polite, easygoing manner, try to initiate some of these ideas of self responsibility, self actualization. And it's funny, some of these people are like into yoga and are vegans and are really like awake on some elements, but then they're just so into this victimization narrative. And it's really just toxic. And so I think this conversation today is really important and powerful. And if you're listening to this and you're being triggered right now, instead of turning off the podcast, maybe just give us a shot and listen a little longer, and be open to these ideas, because this stuff, and this is another thing I want to talk about today, is the programming idea that we've been literally programmed since the day we're brought into this reality due from the control matrix. So I think there's a lot of control apparatus that we have to disintegrate in order to master our emotion, right? So there is an element of the mental here and understanding this. So I would love to dive into that as well, Bear.
Yeah, social engineering, of course, has made it very trendy to be a victim. There's a great competition to see who's the greatest victim. And it really, you know, just polarizes people even more. And then, of course, in order to be accepted in this trend, we virtue signal about how sympathetic we are to victims, or even try to suggest that you know, we're part of the victim class ourselves, you know, in some way. And the latest form of virtue signaling, of course, is wearing a mask. And if you're wearing a mask, well, that means you care about other people. So we won't jump into that. We've tackled that a lot with some really knowledgeable doctors that were guests on this program that really helped us see through that charade. So let's move on to the next slide. And this is step one in clinical protocols. And there's ways to do this with a waveform analysis. It can actually be done with labs or instruments, where we analyze the XYZ axis of waveforms coming out of people's bodies and in their blood. And there's different levels of this. So let's just do a summary first, then we'll go into the very first component. So emotional patterning. You know, psychoanalysis, like medicine, has become a very linear labeling kind of process to diagnose what you have. And then when you get that label, then that's supposed to make us feel better because we know what we have. And then we take a drug for it, and then we just live with it. So what we have to do is take a few steps back to when science was real science. In fact, it used to be called alchemy. Alchemy was a three-dimensional science. So to look at psychoanalysis, we want to look at it in a three-dimensional psycho-spiritual perspective, through that perspective. And when you go into old school alchemy, as you can see here in the first line, their symbols were the square and the circle. And we won't get into the symbolism and everything. And it wasn't just an occult mysticism. These people actually were very advanced and understanding teachings that had been on the planet forever. And they were putting these teachings to practical application to do many things, including medicine. Now, a gentleman by the name of Walter Russell came along, and he explained the square and the circle, the original alchemical symbols. He explained them in a mechanical way as the cube and the sphere. Now, the cube is the sacred geometry that is responsible for all creation, because that's what incubates or gives form to the waves that emanate from our thoughts in electrical vectors. Were you about to say something, Mike?
No. Go ahead.
Okay.
This is
Glad I heard
fascinating.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the cube and the sphere, you know, if you imagine a cube, it has six, imagine you're standing inside a cube, it has 6 surfaces. And then if you bounce some beams through the cube, it's going to bounce off those inner surfaces and actually create a sphere. And that is how electrical vectors work. And the cube and the sphere, furthermore, can be explained as the yin and yang that we understand through Chinese medicine. And so now we have alchemy in a three-dimensional sort of explanation. And then as we individualize in consciousness, we have the ability to play within that cube and shape those electrical vectors to take on characteristics that will then outpicture in a three-dimensional way in our reality. So now imagine you're standing in that cube again. That creates an XYZ axis. And in Tesla talked about it greatly. Walter Russell talked about it. In the ancient scriptures, they talked about the law of the 3 times 3. And we always have this magical number 9, which we're going to talk about in a few slides down the road. But the 3 times 3 represents the 6 planes of the cube, and your consciousness in a three-dimensional thought form production standing in the middle of the cube, which creates 3 more, that creates a 9, and it satisfies the law of the 3 times 3. And if you really get into the physics of this, it's not woo-woo at all. You'll understand more about physics than you could ever imagine. And you can also apply those principles to technology and medicine and engineering, and things will work. They will self-renew, and you won't have all the problems inherent in our technology and medicine today. So the next one down there, these are the areas we're going to go over very quickly. The 7 rays. Now, in the Walter Russell work, he showed how the elemental periodic, the periodic table of elements, each element occupied a certain octave, and each octave or level, if you could call it that, is represented by 7 tonal fields, just like the musical scale. 7 notes. We have 5 sharp notes, but the 7 key notes, it's the tonal fields, and they also represent colors. Those are the elements that those tonal fields are what we play with and nuance in unlimited ways to give us, again, all the characteristics of our experience. So there's a way right off the bat that we have to acknowledge how we as individuals have a unique way of qualifying these 7 tonal fields to create an experience that is different and gives us a different experience from anybody else in the universe. The next thing we're going to talk about is character fixations, which are core reaction patterns that are the baggage that we bring into this lifetime and give us a tendency to react to life events the way we do. And there's an ancient Sufi system called the Enneagram that we used in clinical medicine to help us understand that. Then beyond that, there are acquired stress patterns, we'll call them, representing emotional vectors that are conditioned through a lifetime of experience, especially through our early programming. And also there are collective stress patternings. In the world of homeopathy, we call that miasm. And then finally, we're going to get into solutions. And the biggest solution we have to getting out of this emotional quagmire where we keep repeating history is our biology itself is programmed to express that through our body to let off pressure so that we can get off the wheel. So even our biology is unique in the mammalian world to give us the chance to rise above basic animal instincts into a rational mode of behavior. So those are the areas that we go through sequentially in our bioterrain protocols. So let's start with the first one, the seven rays.
This, I was going to say, okay, you're going to go through each, because I was like, this slide alone, and for those listening on the podcast, you can find this on YouTube, or we're doing this on DLive right now, so you can join us live every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on our DLive. But we'll have these slides on our website and the blog, and so you can review these. But I was going to say, Bear, that slide alone is 15 podcasts. We actually did a podcast. We did a podcast with on the Enneagram with Mono Kretry, which is really an amazing listen. It was one of our first guest podcasts. I highly recommend it. We did it last fall, so if you guys, I highly recommend going back and listening to that. So anyhow, man, I have a quick question about
Mono.
Okay, go ahead.
You go. I was just going to say Mono did a great job. It's just an informal chat, but she's a practitioner of the Enneagram from Switzerland, and she's one of the best practitioners in the world. And she has just a very relaxed, laid-back demeanor. And maybe after this podcast, people can go back and glean a little bit more about what she was talking about, because she goes very, very deep into it. We didn't get into the mechanics so much of it. I kind of hit on the fringe a bit, but yeah, go back and listen to that one. Your turn.
Okay, yeah. I learned so much in that one, and it's something I need to revisit too, for sure. But on that first aspect of that slide, you talk about the initiation of the electrical force, or the embodiment, the yin and the yang, the circle and the square, the sphere and the cube. So can we imagine that as the cube and then the circle within the cube? Is that correct? Or are they separate?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't have a sphere unless you have a cube. It's the yin and the yang. You can't have one without the other.
Okay. And that, I know, that connects to so much. Walter Russell into sacred geometry, and they're all kind of the mathematical language of the universe, I guess.
And it's exactly what we talk about in the Hermetic philosophy with alchemy. Now we're just bringing it three-dimensional, and as Walter Russell said, when we do that, then we are clearly in the age of transmutation. And what's happening right now on the planet is there are people trying to prevent us to move on to that level, because it will be impossible for certain people to control other people at that point.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, continue on, sir.
All righty. So the seven rays. This will, of course, seem pretty esoteric to most people, But when you do get into the physics of it, it's exactly what Walter Russell's talking about. Tesla knew exactly, what Walter was up to. They used to communicate about these issues. And it's what, going back in time, the Hermetic philosophy, all the traditions of all time, Chinese medicine, they understood these 7 tonal fields as being the creative forces that characterize every thought that we have and are given birth to by emotion. So I have a process that I learned to do a 7-ray chart on an individual when they came in. Now, if you go back in the day when we had the real Dalai Lama, and that's another story, but I'll just leave that hanging. They picked the Dalai Lama at birth by doing an astrological ray chart. Astrology, as it's done today, that is separate from ray analysis, is half the story. It's like what we do in the scientific community today with reductionism. Now, there are a lot of brilliant astrologers out there that go very deep, so I'm not just broad brushing all of them as, linear and not deep thinkers. But unless you are integrating 7-ray analysis, in other words, doing 7-ray astrology, you're not doing real astrology. So back when they were to say pick, a person is supposed to be a healer in life and he's going to learn medicine, or even, the next Dalai Lama, they did a 7-ray analysis. And what they found is that there are 5 spheres. One we can call the transpersonal, which is more our higher electronic body, our higher self, whatever terminology you want to call it, doesn't matter. Then you have the lower sphere, which is our personality. And the personality is further qualified with 3 spheres we'll call mind, the emotional astral, and the physical. Now, when we do a ray analysis, we are able to determine which ray occupies each of those 5 spheres. And you could look at those 7 rays and you could see we have them listed down below. I'm not going to go through them all, it'll take way too long. But they represent not just 7 tonal fields, but then holographically outpicture as 7 archetypes. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with all the systems we have that end up being in groups of 7, including our music, which should tell you everything you need to know. Now, each tonal field or archetype has its strengths, inherent strengths that it will lend to our whole experience. And in the world of 7 rays, we call them glamours, which would maybe be your challenges. So again, you have a polarity within each tonal field, and how we at the soul level are given these 7 rays, one of the 7 rays qualifying each of the 5 spheres, will give us not only a very unique perspective, but also a somewhat predictable mode of behavior. And at the level of the soul, as we embody, our challenge is to manifest the strengths versus the glamours. So if you don't understand, let's just say I'm doing psychoanalysis, I'm a psychologist or a psychiatrist. If I'm not appreciating who that soul is on that level and what energies are working, we can talk story all day long, and the only thing probably that's going to happen is that you're going to put them further into story rather than into solution. So that's the 7 rays. It's a huge topic. And, the little quote I have, this is a paraphrasing quote. It's not exact, but the human entity is the septenary ray from the one, which brings us right back to Walter Russell, who understood and demonstrated there's only one substance, one intelligence or consciousness in the universe, and then these tonal fields will be the qualifying actions as that consciousness produces thought that is, pops into experience with the emotional velocity. And then these 7 rays are then used as the paintbrushes to give it all the nuances that we experience. How are we doing, Mike?
We're doing great. Lively chat, and this slide is a podcast unto itself.
Oh, yeah. Let me, we'll go to the next one.
I could go on 16 tangents here, but I know we got a lot to get through, so I think we will keep the 7 rays for another podcast. Also, this relates to my studies with the Ascended Masters teachings. They talk about rays a lot, your twin ray, for example, too, and finding your kind of like your soulmate that through the life cycles of incarnations. And it's a very, very important topic and something I would love to expand upon on a future podcast.
So, as consciousness has an idea for an individual embodiment, like myself or you or anybody, that's an idea that gives birth to an individualization of the creator. And because an embodiment is a so-called physical event, it has to be a product of electrical vectors. So doesn't it make sense that when that original idea of each one of us individuates, that there are 2 polarities, and that other polarity is the opposite of you. And so we all have that so-called twin ray that's wandering the universe somewhere. And at the end of the journey, you do reunite with that twin ray and become complete and balanced once again. Soulmate is a little bit more of a romanticized, explanation.
And this relates to the principle, the universal law of gender too, right? Because typically this is the opposite gender reflection as well. And so classically your twin ray would, if I was in the male form, would be a female, correct?
Yes. And we take turns through embodiments with different genders. And boy, this is a real charged kind of issue, but there will be overlays from prior embodiments and so forth. If that energetic was not brought into balance, and even though we might be wearing a male or a female spacesuit, if we do not at least try to bring a certain amount of balance into our being, regardless of the gender we express, then those gender imbalances can create confusion in succeeding lifetimes.
And I feel like these waters are muddied even more because of the nature of our society and the controllers' deceptions and inversion of reality where they play with gender. And so while there may be some really honest, like you were just saying, where there isn't some balances and we have some gender, unbalanced in the polarity there in terms of how people relate their current gender, we also have the very I don't know how I can call it. You know what I'm getting at here. This relates to our recent discussion about good old Billy Gates being potentially a female that was inverted into a man. And it seems like the controlling class likes to really mess with this for some reason, as they love to invert and play with nature.
Yeah, because when we achieve balance, we achieve our full power. And please, folks, don't read anything into this other than we all have created imbalances. And if there is any gender ambiguity, we'll say, it's not because we're bad or we did something wrong. It just means that societally, instead of understanding that that is a very potent force, that sexual polarity. In fact, we live in a sexual universe. You cannot manifest anything unless you have the yin and the yang mating, 2 electrical vectors mating and creating the reality that we experience, and our bodies are no exception. So rather than cultivating a programming that keeps us in confusion about our very nature, we should be coming into a place of knowledge so that we can seek that balance for our own individual journey as well as a better culture as a whole. And of course, we've made it into an issue of division. We've created victim classes and all manner of things that are only making things worse. And understandably, in past times, there were periods where people were persecuted for exhibiting imbalances, and we all have our imbalances, and that is absolutely wrong. So the programming plays on those unfortunate instances to create new victim classes, but perpetuates the imbalances in our disempowerment. And that's what we're trying to say. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of hateful comments just for saying that. But hey, we're just talking electricity. I've got no skin in the game. None of us should have any skin in the game. We should just all want to know the truth so that we can love each other and create a better world.
Amen to that. Okay, let's continue on with the
Next
slides.
slide. We better get out of there before we get into more trouble, right?
Oh man. But that is a great
I
point.
know.
It's like it's all about empowerment, and when you understand, if we had a society and a culture that actually cared and wasn't controlled by psychopaths, we would have this all nipped in the bud, where we would have a caring kind of aspect towards those imbalances versus the victimization that is used to create the polarities, the dissension, the hate, and the confusion.
And we also live at a time where, I don't know about you, but I don't know of one person in my circles that really cares what anybody does in the privacy of their own home. I mean, people just don't care anymore, which is a good sign that we have reached a level of maturity. And but it's like the guy in the schoolyard that was always trying to provoke fights between two people by pushing one into the other. You have these people out there doing this stuff. So
Yeah.
Okay, so character fixations, this is a product of this is what we talk about when we discuss the Enneagram. So after a 7-ray analysis, it's very helpful if you're a practitioner of any kind, whether it's a biological medicine or if you're more into pure psychoanalysis. You want to understand that we all, again, bring baggage into this lifetime, which are a composite of the electrical vectors that we have thrown out of balance in the past. Now, in a waveform analysis, you will look at spheres in an XYZ axis, and you can determine the distortions, the direction of the distortions, if it's going kind of southeast to west, or any version. Then it's going to tell you what these vectors are doing as far as creating tendencies on the emotional level. So let's go to the chart. And this will bring us, even though this is the Sufi and the alchemical understanding, this goes right into Walter Russell waveform mechanics. So you start with singularity, which is just stillness. There's nothing. The creator is pure consciousness. And by the way, we're all an individuation of the creator. So we're not at all suggesting that we're separate somehow. There's no separation. We are part of the one. So when that stillness has an idea, it creates an electrical vector that then polarizes. So let's go to the triangle.
So you mean
Go
we
ahead.
already have singularity? That the transhumanists hijacked that term because they're once again trying to invert reality and like push that we can get singularity with robots or AI. Hey, we already have singularity.
Yeah. And, when we talk about sacred geometry, and if our slide, before we're talking about cubes and spheres, rather than thinking that sacred geometry is, little cubes, circulating in outer space somewhere as entities of their own, hopefully this will maybe help explain what we're talking about with geometry. So look at the triangle. And there's a reason why the triangle has always been considered sacred and why it's the initiation of the 3 times 3. So you notice up above you have the 9. The 9 you can think of as a fulcrum. It's where the pendulum is anchored. So you have an idea. That's number 9. That's the original electrical vector. Now that polarizes into the 6 and the 3. Now the 6 and the 3, think of it as a pendulum going back and forth. It's an electrical vector, and these 2 sides to the triangle, the 6 and the 3, are seeking balance with each other. And it's our job as sentient beings to create a balance between the 2 sides and not have it lopsided, which is going to create one of those distortions that we're talking about that creates a little rub on the wagon wheel, and it's going to make us react every time we go around a certain bend. So the triangle now represents the polarization of electrical forces. Are you with me?
Yep.
Now, the next thing we have is the Hex Head. So we have 6. Now, this gets a little bit more complex, but all we're talking about is the predictable pathway of electrical vectors that are produced by the original triangle. And when you understand the waveform mechanics, you're going to have a pathway that is going to create the next 6, which we could, with a further discussion, maybe relate to a cube with the original idea with the 3, and that would take us back to the cube and the sphere. Now, remember, with Walter Russell in our past talks, we discussed how every waveform has 18 dimensions, which is just 2 times 9, and representing the polarities of each of those dimensions. Now, in the Enneagram, we have a 9-pointed star. So if you take the triangle here, put it in the middle of the hexad, the hexad, then you're going to have a 9-pointed star. You're going to have a point here, here, and one up here. And the 9-pointed star, which you'll see in the next slide, is the Enneagram. And if you take vortex mathematics, if anybody's ever seen a couple YouTubes on that, you should at least watch the basics. It will show you exactly mathematically how the 9-pointed star is created and how the Sufis back then, and even predating them, they knew about these electrical waveforms, their predictable energetic pathways, and then they isolated the points, the 9 points, and related them to parts of the body, just like we do in medicine. If I do a waveform analysis with, say, a dual impedance antenna, it's going to tell me the distortions, and I can do a similar lab analysis that creates chemistry to tell me about those same electrical vectors that then we can coincide with the waveform analysis. And that will tell us on the level of chemistry, on the level of emotion, on every dimension of that person's being, what's going on. And that's where that old saying, as above, so below, comes in. Because if you understand one dimension, you'll understand the holographic representation of every other dimension, whether we're looking through a microscope, a telescope, looking at a person's musculoskeletal system, their biochemistry, their microbiology. It's all going to be holographically represented as a dimension of the same electrical forces, and they all have to represent the same electrical forces, because that old saying, in the end, there can be only one. So character fixation, bottom line here, the greatest pressure point seeking balance. So let's look a little deeper into the Enneagram. I have an example. There are 9 fixation points. Now, this is going to be highly simplified. We're not going to get into it hardly at all, but just take away the gist of it. We're going to look at fixation point number 1. And you notice on these slides, I actually created these little diagrams for our website at one time. Maybe they'll, and I have, a whole bunch of slides like this for each fixation point with explanations. Someday we'll put those back up, maybe in our member section.
And
so
we related that to Floral Essences, right? And the using of flowers and their informational fields to adjust these frequencies?
Yeah, we're going to get into Floral Essences, the last slide in the discussion, as one of many solutions. And what I do clinically is, based on all these things we're talking about, I make topical creams with essential oils and floral essence and other homeopathic bases that drive these more effectively, the informational fields more effectively into the body. Sometimes we have to put them on neurological zones and other things that make them more effective and get those informational fields, where we need them, no different than if you put some software into a computer. So here we are, the Enneagram, fixation point number 1, example. So look at number 1 here. I have that kind of highlighted in a darker color there. So here, the 9 points, this is what we're talking about. Now we have the triangle superimposed into the Hex Head, and we have the 9-pointed star. Now, you can differentiate the 3 areas of the Enneagram into body, head, and heart. Now, on an emotional level, if you happen to have a distortion that creates, an effect up here in the 198, and it affects the body, you're going to have, let's say, anger issues, okay? And down here, head, which is more pertaining to people that are more mental by nature, you're going to have a tendency to go more into fear. Now, all of us have experienced all these emotions, and there's a reason why we don't just experience, the main fixation we have on the Enneagram, because we have a lot of conditioned programming and things that you have to account. And clinically, you also have to sequentially know when to go into any one levels of either Enneagram or 7-ray analysis or stress patterning that we're going to talk about next. And that's the art of clinical medicine, is you have to have a system that does things in proper sequence. Because when you're doing emotional deconstruction, we'll say, if you take things out of sequence, just like when you do the same thing with biology, and that's what we do a lot in conventional medicine, you unearth things that it's really better to let sleeping dogs lie. And so just like when you're in the trades, you need to do things in proper order. You need to do that, especially with emotional deconstruction, because you can create a lot more problems and even create more physical problems if you don't handle the emotions right. So the head is the fear, the heart, we get more into the tendency of shame and that sort of thing. I'm a recovering Catholic, so we have a kind of a patent on shame with original sin and all that business. So instinctive anger is these we would call the instincts, and anger is the instinct of 1 in our example. And now when you look at the wings over here, remember each of these points 1 through 9, when you study them, you're going to find they are qualified in different ways, different tendencies. And then each of those tendencies can be further qualified in a myriad of ways. So just keep in mind, this is very simplified what we're doing here. But let's just say you're a 1 on the Enneagram. And again, there's ways that you can get into it a bit. You're going to have the 1 on either side we call the wings. And this is going to create a pendulum effect, just like we talked about in the triangle. But in this case, your pendulum one side versus the other. And so you're going to have the tendencies of the 1, and you're also going to take on some tendencies of the 9 when you swing in that direction, based on how you react to life events, of the number 2 when you swing into that direction. And then the next thing, moving on very quickly, when we get to the Hex Head, we were talking about earlier, where energy flows in very predictable path, depending on what fixation point you are. When you're in stress, you'll tend to move towards one particular number, which in the case of the 1 will be towards a 4. And this is all, just kind of take it for what it is right now. And then, if you're moving in stress in that direction, you will have a tendency to manifest more the challenges of that number rather than the strengths. So you look here in this final point here, it says when you go towards 4 as a 1, you'll probably get a little moody and irrational in your perspective. Oh, sorry, I have that totally backwards. I have to fix that slide. Yeah, 4, moody, irrational. No, that's right. This is what I have wrong here. I should have stress over here and positive integration over here. Sorry. So when you are, on the other hand, moving in a positive direction of growth, you're just doing a lot of inner work and really trying to understand yourself, then you're going to move in a direction of a 7 and manifest the strengths of a 7, which are more of a spontaneous demeanor, that's based more on just joyful expression. So that's the Enneagram in about 30 seconds. And please realize, everybody, there's way more to it than that. It's a science. It represents physics. Again, vortex mathematics, waveform mechanics will explain all these forces in detail, and then also help you understand how all of the dimensions of those waveforms manifest also in a dimension we call emotion. And that's what the Sufis understood and made a big deal out of, because emotion is what makes us tick. Human beings are not rational beings. We are emotional beings. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to put ourselves here in the first place.
And that's why transhumanism will never work.
Perfect. Fantastic point. Fantastic point.
Yeah, and that's...
So let me... Go ahead.
I was going to say, the science behind the Enneagram is just blowing my mind, because I've been working on a lot of inner work and journaling. And, this is a really fun topic that's exploding on the self-help world, is people taking responsibility for their growth. And I think if you can kind of pinpoint what type of personality you are in the Enneagram, then you can be more empowered to take the right steps towards that growth. So that's cool.
Yeah. And back up a little bit to the 7 rays. If anybody wants to explore more about the 7 rays, this is volume 1 of Tapestry of the Gods. Here's volume 2. I was aware of this information through other readings, but the University of the 7 Rays did a good job in putting together manuals for people, especially that were going deep into psychoanalysis. And there are a lot of great psychologists and psychiatrists out there that use your training to go into this level. And Tapestry of the Gods is a good manual to help you understand constructing a 7-ray analysis for yourself or for somebody else. Okay?
Got it.
Let's see what else we've got here. Okay, so the next level we want to go to is stress patterning. So to summarize, the 7-ray is what we construct at the soul level to give us the perspective for what we need to learn in any given embodiment. Then we went into the Enneagram, which is our collective energies that we have put into motion prior that then we bring in, and those represent another level of complexity of things that basically we need to take care of because we're the ones that put those energetics into motion, and it's our responsibility to bring them into balance. Now, stress patterning, just to complicate things further, in any lifetime, of course, we are a product also of our social programming. And let's just take, I should read what I have here. So conflict energy, what is that? And the first line here, stress pattern equals the resistance to life's events from inherent inclinations. So let's just say that maybe our inclination from the Enneagram creates a reaction to life events. We're going to see things through the lens of that character fixation. So rather than just experiencing events in a very neutral, bipartisan way, we're looking at it through the lens of our character fixation, and that creates a reaction or a resistance to these events that then compound our whole the intensity of those emotional experiences in the first place. So a stress pattern, as we said, personal filter based on our inclinations that suppresses unencumbered experience. So rather than just having an experience for what it is in an unencumbered way, just unconditionally accepting it and dealing with it, we react and therefore have a very hard time getting what we need out of it because we're projecting through our own programming. Now, which brings us to the next one, early programming. External belief systems compound this conflict. So that creates conflict energy, which creates real emotional back pressure created by the stress pattern. So early programming is based on other people's belief systems. As parents, we all mean well. As teachers, we mean well. But in fact, we are programming our children, and especially toddlers and infants, into a reality that's based on our belief system, which is typically 100% inverted and backwards. And now that as a soul newly re-embodied, you have to forever balance that and deal with the conflict that creates, that as a new in a new embodiment where you come in less encumbered. Now you have that pressure that's constantly trying to make you conform into a belief system that isn't even real in the first place. And of course, a lot of us as adults are taking all sorts of measures in order to work our way out of these things. And what we do find out is because they were programmed at such an early age, old habits really die hard. In fact, they become part of our neurology. Our actual, the nerves, the dendrites morphologically change their size, shape, and function to accommodate that. And we're going to see in the next slide the problems that creates. Wow. So conflict energy is a real back pressure. And we made a bold statement earlier that collective emotions create the weather. Well, just like we'll see again in a moment, how this back pressure accumulation of energy will create traumas that blow up in our face during life. Collectively, those are in the atmosphere and create what we call storms, tornadoes, and so forth. And even, the people that start constructing that with geoengineering. And so weather is another holographic expression of humanity's emotional state. So traumas are actually, for instance, you have a breakup in a relationship, you have a financial calamity. It's traumatic, and we would, if we didn't know any better, we'd say, oh, that's what's, making me feel the way I do. But those traumas are just a manifestation of the back pressure of these conflicts we're alluding to, and they create those outer events that then we accuse of making us feel a certain way, but it's the other way around. So the emotional back pressure is just a byproduct of the stress pattern, which creates those traumatic events in our life. And traumas occur at regular intervals, and traumas create toxic radiation and affect energies and organs and deplete, our energy reserves and our organs. Now, we'll go a little deeper in the next slide. But Mike, any comments so far?
I mean, where do you even start with this one? This is there's entire YouTube channels and books and stuff dedicated to all this stuff. This is massive. I mean, as a parent, and maybe we'll get into this towards the end with with different solutions, but how do we go about parenting in a responsible way where we're not constantly putting our programming into our little children's souls as they're developing? It's like it's a hefty responsibility, and then balancing that with just everyday life, and then our own conflicts and traumas and all that. So it's it's a hefty topic.
So one of the things I used to do in clinic is with one of the lab assays, I would create a stress patterning chart. And in that chart, and it would, reduce to mathematics, it would create the number of traumas. It would pinpoint the number of traumas that a person had experienced in their life. Now, we have our little daily dramas, but we're talking about those things that you remember, that are significant. And we would also be able to pinpoint a very approximate age in a person's life when those were experienced. So, for instance, just to say I did that on you, Mike, we have, say, 8 traumas, and we would have it into certain periods of your life. And when I talk to individuals, I'd say, okay, when you were such and such an age as a child, what was going on there? And invariably, when we're discussing this with people, they say, oh, that's when, my mom and dad got divorced or something. So what we're talking about is real physics, the physics behind the energy that you can extrapolate from chemistry and decode mathematically. And why would you want to go back and have a person appreciate that maybe something happened when they're 7 years old? Well, when you look at the trauma sequence as a whole, then you can actually have that person appreciate exactly what we're talking about, that this is very predictable because of these inclinations, these programmings, because these resistance to life events that create the back pressure based on the baggage we bring into a lifetime. People say, wow, this happened at that point. And the second trauma in the sequence, yeah, I had something happen there. And so now you're able to understand the past, and that allows you to release the present and not carry it forward in the future. And, you really see light bulbs come on in people, especially when they're amazed that you were even able to get within a matter of months of something happening when they were back in childhood. And so this is real stuff. It's not psychic or anything. This is real hardcore science. And this is what we call stress patterning. I'm going to get back to this and see if I can remember what I put on the PowerPoint here.
We were just finishing the trauma. But what's cool about this too is, as you were saying earlier, we like to connect like a personal shame or a personal story to these emotions from the stress patterning and from the trauma. And what this does is this just shows that, one, this is just part of reality. This is just the physics of reality, and we all go through it. That's why we're here. That's the nature of the reality we're involved with. So, you know, figuring out ways to then understand that, step back a little bit, see it from above, and understand the methodology we can take to swing those energetics, like on those Enneagram models, so that we can kind of move on. You know, it's a powerful modality versus just attaching our own kind of you know, personal kind of story to these, that it's like our fault kind of deal, you know.
Yeah, and everything we're describing is not new information. At this present time, we're able to understand things from what we think of as a contemporary perspective, because we do have certain understandings, especially that the Western world has brought forth, so that we can bring these concepts out of the mysticism and vagueness of foreign cultures and make it work for us now and help us actually apply it in very practical ways. So let's finish with this and we'll get into the solutions, and hopefully we'll have some time left over to chat. As usual, things take way too long. So organ trauma sequence, that's what I was describing. And besides just pinpointing certain episodes in people's lives, we're able to understand how organs at those times were affected and therefore contribute to maybe health problems that people are experiencing. And the original research on this organ trauma sequence was done with real studies that showed how different organs of the body succumb to nuclear radiation. And certain organs are able to withstand more of that kind of stress than others. The thymus gland is the weakest, and the thymus, of course, is our, you know, more the center of our immunity, and the lymphatics are the strongest. So depending on the numbers we would come up with, we could actually see what organs were affected, you know, most at different points, and then how, again, they're contributing to people's present problems. And it would also affect how each organ, you know, because it has an associated emotion and function, it would explain a lot about a situation that a person was experiencing. In Oriental medicine, you know, if you just look at the 5 elements and that theoretical basis, which goes much deeper, that's just more of a superficial example. You know, each organ is, like for instance, take the liver is recognized as associated with anger. Well, that organ, its real job is to eliminate or discharge the back pressure of that energy that we call anger. You know, those the 9, the 1, and the 8 points in the Enneagram. You know, when you're up in that region, that's more your anger tendencies. Well, the liver, you know, is not just supposed to discharge or eliminate physical toxins. It's supposed to get rid of that energetic that we associate with anger and bring anger into the pure form of that energy represented by the liver, which is a real strong, motivating, and powerful force that you could move mountains with, you know, if it isn't stagnating into its lower counterpart that we call anger. So organ stress equals unstable function and impeded energy flow. And again, that's what we call emotion. The less resilient organs, when a less resilient organ like the thymus is involved, or the ones, you know, there's actually 24 organs that we isolate in this whole system of analysis. So the lower number organs, if they're affected, your emotional reactions are going to be more intense and more acute. So you might have an emotional trauma that's a real intense blow up, but you know, maybe less duration. And then when the stronger organs are involved, like the lymphatics, then you're, maybe going to have more of a long, drawn out, long-term emotional stress and illness for that matter, if we want to think of that in the physical body. So here's the last part of this, and we'll move on to the next part. Mind's desire versus body addiction. Now, what happens when all of this is going on? Remember, we talked about nerves change size, shape, and function. And also, we get entrained in certain types of chemical release. For instance, if you're really addicted to nicotine or caffeine, what we're doing is craving those chemicals because they provoke a strong release of norepinephrine. When we go into drama, we get the same kind of fix. So even though it feels crappy, we're getting a nice drama norepinephrine fix. And just like reaching for the next cigarette, even though we know it might be killing us, we light up anyway. That's the same thing with these emotions, and why certain people have strong tendencies to be emotional kings and queens, or drama queens and kings, I should say. Now that's going to create a conflict right there, because our mind's desire, of course, is for happiness and harmony. And meanwhile, we have this body addiction. It's like, man, these cigarettes are killing me, but I'm lighting up anyway. And that's going to create, a lot of dissonance and more conflict, compounding everything we've already talked about. So when we're doing the stress patterning, we have ways to help people reconcile mind's desire versus body addiction. And I want to move through this quickly here. So body's addiction, electrical vectors that align with people and circumstances to elicit similar neurochemical events. So we actually crave the things that we don't want. And then mind's desires in opposition to addiction, and then amplification of resistance and conflict as a result. And in trauma sequence processing, it's important to work from the most recent backward to the earliest. And that's one of the sequential things you need to pay attention to when you're a practitioner. And for folks that are doing this at home, don't worry, you don't have to get all complicated or worry about it. There are ways that you can safely work through your issues and never have to see anybody else in the process. So biological solutions is the next slide. This gets into the new German medicine understanding, which is the only science-based taxonomy of disease in existence, which should ruffle a few feathers by making that kind of statement. But instinctual programs. So embryologically, we are programmed with every animal instinct from the entirety of the animal kingdom, from reptilian to mammalian. And so when we are encountering life events, in addition to the other issues that we've already discussed, we also have these animal instincts that are triggered. But the good news is humans are unique in all the mammalian world, because our biology works on our behalf to help us discharge these back pressures that keep us in these dramas and programmings that make our bodies sick and keep us on an endless wheel of reincarnation. So what we have is a mechanism that when we have trauma, we'll say, that would, maybe in the animal instinctual world, which would have to do with basic survival issues, these survival triggers have their human social analogs or counterparts to what humans, to what animals experience. So maybe we're as living as what we think of as in a more refined culture than the animal world. You lose your job, you lose a mate, you any number of things that happen to us in life, then those will trigger these survival mechanisms built into our biology. And at the level of the psyche, the way we differ for animals is that will trigger a very specific part of the brain that will then, and it has to be a sudden, intense trigger, as you see right here, that will create a conflict back pressure. And then the brain is in a specific brain area stimulated, which can be demonstrated on a CAT scan. And then that brain body correspondence happens where that the specific part of the brain that's triggered has obviously a corresponding body area, and then that is going to provoke tissue changes in that part of the body that will holographically outpicture. In other words, you'll get a tissue response to the conflict, and if this isn't diagnosed as a disease or treated as a disease, if you do the bioterrain medicine to make sure that the biology is supported and has everything it needs in order to run this response without getting into danger zones and don't impede it in any way. And more importantly than anything, help the psyche understand that, no, this is not a disease. This is for your benefit, like even to the point of growing something in your body. Then that biological expression will release the back pressure in the psyche and help us, again, transit out of lower emotional, animal, instinctual reaction into more of a reaction, rational, sentient sort of state. And that means that we can have emotional issues or traumas happening in our life and have, if our bodies were more healthy and less tampered with medically, these things would come and go and not even be diagnosed. We wouldn't even know about it. And at the level of biology, we would be releasing these back pressures through tissue holographic responses and be able to progress emotionally, even though most of this stuff is subconscious, we wouldn't even know about it. So it's an amazing thing when you understand that our very bodies are designed to help us get off of the wheel. And it doesn't always even have to be a conscious process. It's just happening. It only, becomes a problem, and we take away that normal mechanism when we tamper with ourselves or through ignorance think that we have to fight disease and microbes and everything else we've been talking about lately. So biological plateaus are when these processes are tampered with. We have tissue changes. They're diagnosed. What happens when you go to the doctor and a priest that's wearing a white robe, that we have a strong belief system that they know more than we do, and they say, well, you better go get your affairs in order? That's going to create a diagnosis conflict. It's going to compound the back pressure of the original conflict that necessitated the tissue change in the first place. And now you've got a way worse situation. And then, of course, you throw in pharmaceuticals and other sorts of modalities that sabotage on a biological level the body's ability to go full circle and impedes what it's trying to do. Then you have real predicaments. And then you can also in life have repeated triggers. We could talk a lot about this, which creates what we call a hanging conflict. You might have an allergy symptom, and it happens every spring. But what we aren't appreciating is, it's not because you are having a histamine reaction to that particular pollen. Now, that is happening on the biological or the chemical level, but that's not what's creating the whole histamine release in the first place. What is happening is that at one point in your life, you had one of these traumas affecting your psyche. You may not even remember it or be aware of it. And it might be at a certain time of year when certain pollens were prevalent. It might be when you were, eating a certain food. And now from that point on, every time you are exposed to that same so-called allergen, it's going to create the same physical response. If you dive more into New German medicine, you're going to understand that even allergies are a product of a psychological trigger, and all the biology just like microbes that we find at the scene of the crime, then are circumstantially blamed for our physical symptoms. Now, we'll finish up here, and I'll let you jump in, Mike. Another thing that's happening on the planet now with all the contaminants we're exposed to, we have it depletes our resources. Just the basic nutritional reservoirs, and also depletes our energetic reservoirs. It impedes the function of organs. It weakens our organs, and so when these conflicts happen and biology creates one of these program responses for our own benefit, now the body is incapable of running the whole program full circle, and we get another one of these, just like a hanging conflict. It makes it, we get on one of these biological plateaus that can actually be dangerous. So in bioterrain medicine, we assess the body and find out where it needs to support. And
We lost him there for a second. Huh. Check, check. 1, 2. Barre Lando. So appears we might have lost him there for a second. Okay. Interesting stuff, you guys. Interesting stuff. Hopefully Bear comes back on here. But yeah, this is everything we talked to all rolled into one slide. So I hope Bear can jump back in. He's on a satellite. He's off grid. So we will see what's going on there. But it looks like we might have lost him. So he'll jump back in a second. So guys, anyways, for me, this is so important, because what we're seeing right now with, like we talked about, the contagion idea and everybody harping on microbes causing disease, we can see right here and there it's much more complex. Reality is much more complex, and it all comes down to our own emotional state, and as both individuality and also as collective. And it looks like we've got Bear joining us back again.
okay.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second. That's okay. I was just stepping in there to talk. So get the slide back up. Did you lose your internet?
Yeah, I think so. It's back on now.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so where'd you lose me?
Oh, we we were on the third point on the biological. We're talking about the biological plateau and related to environmental aspects in bioterrain medicine.
We probably beat that one up enough. So we have one more slide, and but let's go ahead and any comments so far?
No, I mean, there's good chatter and people talking about all sorts of fun stuff in the chat here on D Live. Just great comments. People are saying this has been an amazing presentation. So let's just keep it going. I don't want to get too off track, because I think we've got one more slide, and then we can kind of open it up to the peanut gallery and have a discussion here. Also, I did just notice my chickens somehow got out into the front yard. I just looked out my office window here and I see 6 chickens right there. I'm like, what are you guys doing out here? So I must have left a gate cracked open. So I'll have to go out. It's okay. They're fine. It's all, the whole property's fenced in, but I just don't want them getting into certain annuals and start destroying my starts. But those little buggers.
I'm looking at my new chicken coop outside my window here too. It's we're thinking of doubling our chickens this year with the looming food shortage. Anyway, let's do one last thing. We'll finish up this real quick. This is about solutions. We already talked about the biggest solution, which is our biology that's recognized in New German medicine. So let's do the last screen share. Clinical solutions. The number one solution is awareness, because you can do anything imaginable, and unless you have an awareness you're not going to get anywhere. Mike just ran out of the room there after his chickens. Okay, so awareness is the key, and in clinical medicine, that's what all measures are pointed to, is to bring people into an understanding that the very forces that are creating their problems are things that they're perpetuating themselves, not in a blame way, but when you understand that, now you become empowered and also are open to using tools that can change your situation forever. Now, one of the things I favor in helping people with the awareness is classical logic. And this could be a whole discussion in and of itself. But there used to be a way, and in fact, I was taught this in school. I probably got the tail end of it. They don't teach us anymore. But it begins with mindful observation based on the sacred sciences, and then going internally and being still with the process and allowing the answers to come to you within that stillness. So in classical logic, we have, it used to be called the trivium and the quadrivium, but there's a sequential way to finding out the truth. And as usual in our contemporary sciences, we do the opposite. It's been inverted. What we do in science is we attempt to come up with a theory which is explaining why, and then we do our observation and our experimentation to prove out our theory or the why. Well, that's absolutely backwards according to classical logic. What an empiricist, a scientist, is supposed to do is to just observe and not have any skin in the game. So you ask yourself questions. The classical questions are who, what, where. And you just gather information. In classical logic, we call this grammar. So you're just getting all of the data that you need. And once you spent substantial time doing that, then you can start to use your reason why what you have observed is what it is. And then now you have a theory or an assessment based on fact rather than the other way around. And then you take that information inside and have a dialogue with yourself, or if it's not in the world of psychoanalysis and it has to do with other levels of science or our physical universe, we can have dialogues with other people in the same endeavor and put our minds together and see if we can come up with some solutions based on what we observe. And in the case especially of psychoanalysis, what we want to do is go inside into that stillness, which is the place where we produce the thoughts in our reality in the first place, get out of the polarities, the dramas, and just let everything sink in and trust that you'll get your answers. Now, that whole process of the trivium should be based on a prior study of the sacred sciences. And the sacred sciences originally were arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So deciphered into Russellian physics, the arithmetic tells you the code, the original natural patterns, that arithmetic reveals. Mathematics, as we like to call it, the way it's used these days, they think is the creative force somehow that makes things happen. But no, mathematics is to be used as a way to map out, to reveal that, yeah, there are predictable methods or patterns that nature uses, including, the way we experience our emotional life. And then geometry, if you look at cymatics, where you're taking sand on a plate and then subjecting it to a sound frequency, and then you see all these perfect geometric forms form on the plate in relation to the sound waves, you realize geometry or form is put into motion by waveforms, and one dimension of a waveform is the sonics. And then music, in the traditional quadrivium system in physics now, we understand, well, they're just talking about frequency, which is the length and the patterning of the waveforms that give all the distinctions to our thoughts, our feelings, and physical manifestations. And then astronomy is really, we're looking at the universal patterns. So if you notice things on any level, whether you're looking at the stars or looking under a microscope, you see the same patterns happening over and over again. So when you have those understandings that people like Walter Russell put out for us to very easily comprehend, and then you go into the trivia method, and in this case, we're talking about applying this to psychoanalysis, you're going to come up with some really good answers and awareness as far as how you got in your present situation. So awareness is key, and there's even a methodical way to go about building your awareness, and that's what I was trying to do through the trivium and quadrivium. Okay, so far, Mike?
Yes, it would be great to see schools go back to this instead of gender studies. Go ahead.
Yeah, and answer recognition. So basically, you get a high SAT score because you went to some clown that teaches you how to take a test, and you figure out how to get a right answer on an objective test, and then you get a dog bone for the right answer. Boy, we've really come a long way, haven't we? So modalities besides awareness, there are technologies. The best way is mind-directed transmutation. Remember, these are tonal fields, and just like sitting down at a piano keyboard, you can, work that keyboard and go up and down all the ranges and, transmute one note into another and create any kind of harmony that you care to once you get the hang of it. Now, in the martial arts, we learn first off, how to just sit and get in touch with our mind to different energy centers, starting with the midline energy centers, going up and down our spine, and then going into extended, energy centers from there. But just if you understand the basic midline ones, which are also the endocrine regulation centers, some people call them the chakras. Just say, you have a fight with your girlfriend and you're angry or you're depressed or whatever. Well, you can sit down, and if you're schooled in this kind of technology, you just go into stillness, you use your mind, you locate your energy, and you're probably going to find it right in your solar plexus somewhere. And then you just use your mind to direct the energy in the heart. Now, once you're at the heart, you just keep your mind there. That's what meditation is. It's an active process. Meditation is not a passive process like we've been taught in a lot of meditative schools. You give your mind a task. So in this case, you keep your mind on the heart center, and within a matter of moments, the more experience you get, that depression, that anger, whatever you're feeling is going to be transmuted into the higher center within the heart, and you're going to forget you ever had a problem in the first place. You have actively taken an energy, you've raised it to a higher energetic level, we'll say, and you have transmuted the anger, the depression, by moving it into the next octave into more of a heart-centered harmony. You can also be even fancier and understand how every tonal field that's represented in those same centers we're talking about has associated colors. So when you understand what colors do, the counterpart of these tonal fields, then you can use those to transmute energy. The highest color, you can use is violet. And just like ultraviolet, we know, is a very good disinfectant in the physical world. Well, you can use your mind to use violet. That's not the only color, but that's the ultimate way to take, we'll say, kind of a toxic emotion and transmute it to purify it into something that's not going to be affecting your body or your well-being adversely. So you can use your body itself to move these energies to places where you'll achieve that transmutation. You can couple that with color visualizations, and each of the colors will have a certain effect, and depending on what you're trying to do, you can have just very good empowering effects and realize that, well, you don't have to stay in a lower, toxic state and affect your health and your finances and your relationships for more than a moment. And all it takes is practice. But the thing that impedes us wanting to just naturally do this, of course, is when you get back to that prior slide, is we have an addiction for drama, because just like reaching for the cigarette, we get a good norepinephrine fix and we want to stay in the drama. But someday we have to grow up, straighten out our spine, and just say, no, I'm tired of living in that level of existence. And also, it's my responsibility to contribute on a planetary level to harmony, rather than just being one of the barnacles on the face of the earth, and do something about this. So it's really our personal responsibility to learn these things and just get out of our own way. In clinic, we have other ways of addressing these things, and we do this by addressing the total body needs when we open up files where we work on people's bodies with everything from, clinical kinesiology, acupuncture, osteopathy, all the physical mediums. You are able to sequentially go through step by step and help the body, like support organs, and things that are impeding the natural flow of communication and energy, and the organ system's natural ability to, discharge the back pressures that we experience emotionally. So that goes a long ways if you know somebody in your neighborhood that can do that sort of thing. And one of the ways I really favor is with sonics, which is sound frequencies. For instance, when I do acupuncture, I like to use tuning forks and other things instead of needles, because with those sound frequencies, I've just found that you can achieve quicker or more dramatic effects. And then also use those systems such as acupuncture, not as a single tool, but as a composite with other tools, to appreciate the holographic outpicturing on every level of a person's being, and sequentially go to those, to the next in line that needs, on behalf of that person, to, get to where they're trying to go. Now, the last thing I'll say is floral essences are fantastic. And floral essences are not just these little cute things you see in the health food store. They are informational fields. Edward Bach, who is a brilliant microbiologist, bacteriologist, is the one that first introduced floral essences to the world. Of course, it's a compartment of homeopathy where he understood that the floral kingdom had those archetypes or counterparts to what we would think of as human emotions. And we're also like the antidotes to toxic emotions. And so flower tinctures, when you know how to use them and how to get to the right thing at the right time, they can be absolutely dramatic in their effects, much more than people can appreciate. And, I studied with some people that were the direct students of Edward Bach. And what I learned is when you use them topically, they're much more effective. And so that's why, we were talking earlier about the Enneagram and the topical remedies that I created to address all those character fixations. We complex them with the mesh essential oils and other homeopathic preparations that get through the portals of the body more efficiently. And also there's German practitioners who have figured out body mapping. In other words, neurological zones on the body that can be more effectively used for certain floral preparations to address certain emotional issues. And also when you get into the use of floral essences, sorry, I know I'm talking fast here, but I just want to finish. You also understand emotional tracks. You can have these acquired issues that we're talking about with conflicts. It can be, all a product of all the other things from Enneagram, and it's never one thing. It's always a combination of all these things that are in effect. but you recognize emotional tracks. You can have a core issue, you have another issue that's a compensation for that core issue, and then the compensation has a decompensation. So you can put together 2, 3, or more flower essences at a time to address all of those mechanisms. And Mike, I'm all done. So if we have any more time, I'd like to stop talking and hear from somebody else.
Oh my goodness gracious. That was a lot of info smacked into another slide there. I would just add that on the transmutation kind of physicality aspect, breath work for me helps a lot when I get into a more frenetic, angry state, going back to breath, which we've done a whole podcast on. Visualization too. The color aspect's really interesting. I have a couple different LED color machines, one in my kids' room that we use. And I actually do a lot of violet color at night when they're going to bed. So that's really interesting. But overall, yeah, Reiki as well, or Reiki, whatever you call it, is a cool modality for this too, right?
Wilhelm Reich.
Exactly. Which I still want to do an entire Alfacast on Wilhelm Reich. Let's not forget that. But
I know some good Reiki practitioners. So I'm going to reach out, or if you know some, you just get a Reiki practitioner, and they can more give a pure perspective from their expertise.
Oh, that would be very cool. I do know the Reiki Ranch in Oregon here who have ordered stuff from in the past. So anyways, you might have a better reach for that. So yeah, gosh, I mean, just solutions is what we're always talking about in the end here. And I think all of us, of course, we have trauma and we have these emotional constructs that we're dealing with on the daily. And to be able to rationalize this more in terms of science and understand, like I was saying earlier, that we all deal with this stuff. It's all part of this experience, and that to have the empowerment to take these on ourselves and for the betterment of humanity is so important right now, especially with all the attacks going on to our emotional state, as the fear is constantly driven into us. And fear is in of itself an emotion, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to reiterate that we've been talking a lot about the germ theory of disease and contagion and everything related to current events. What we talked about today is so much more fundamental and so much more important than the germ theory of disease. If we could really wrap our minds around everything we discussed and approach the world's ills from these technologies, from this understanding, we wouldn't have to talk about any of those other things in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, it's that simple. And a powerful way to kind of start closing down the chat today. We're already over we're at 2 hours right now, and I know we like to keep it around that. So, man, I have so much to digest from this show today. We will make sure to get those slides up on our website. Speaking of, our website a new website will be launching shortly. We've been really working hard on it. So we'll have a whole section featuring that, Bear. If we can get that up, I think that's really important for people to see these slides, especially if you're listening to the podcast on iTunes or something. Yeah, any other kind of parting words? I mean, I feel like I could talk another 16 hours on this, but I think it almost is a better service just to kind of break these up into future podcasts.
Yeah, I'm pretty much talked out.
I would love to go into Bach too on another podcast and get into the floral essences and things like that. I mean, there are people that have questions in here that could lead to a ton of stuff in terms of oils versus tinctures versus liquids, and different ways to capture those essences. As you've talked about spagyrics and things like that. So it would be great. Creams too, right? Is a great way to go about it. So
maybe a couple things we can just share. This is my favorite, for anybody to get if they want to delve more into Bach flowers.
And
this
for those listening,
Joy and
Yeah, go ahead. Explain that for those listening to the podcast.
Julian Bernard was an actual student of Edward Bach, so I think it's a real good place for people to start with this book.
It's called Bach Flower Remedies. And that's another thing we'll be doing is getting more of our resources set up so people can find all of these different resources in one place. I know Russ has been working on that, and we're working on that. So that'll be on the new site eventually, as well as in our Telegram.
Yeah. Another good book is this one. And that gets more into how emotional remedies can be complex and how we can combine flower tinctures.
New Bach Flower Therapies. And who's that by? It's a cool book.
Dietmar Kramer.
I'm sorry, say again?
Dietmar Kramer.
Okay. Cool. We'll
Maybe
get these.
Put it in the show.
Yeah, we'll put this all in the show notes. I want to come and borrow one of those books or get them myself. It's funny, I have California poppies exploding all over our property, and I really wanted to look into capturing those essences and using that.
Yeah. And the last one I'll share is new Bach Flower Body Maps. This is another practitioner who understood the neurological zones and how topical tinctures can be used in association with neurology and be more effective.
Very cool. Wow. Well, let's do a podcast on that. And I would love to dive deep into that and read up on that. That would be really fun. So, hey, man, I think we've exhausted my brain so far for today. What a great chat. And I hope people can get a lot out of this. We're really just scratching the surface on this topic, guys. So what an amazing presentation today. We really appreciate that, Bear. Really fun. We've got some great guests coming up for the rest of the month. We've got Josh Del Sol next week. It'll be on a different time zone. It'll be actually 2 o'clock Stant PST on D Live next Thursday. Just keep that in mind. And we'll be talking about the 5G Summit. We'll be talking about sovereignty and non-consent strategies for everything that's going on. So this will relay probably into quantum language and all sorts of fun topics, Bear. So that'll be a really fun chat. And then the week after, we have Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan coming on to talk about super wellness. And I just want to give a massive thanks to Dr. Edith. We have your book that you're nice enough to sign and send to us. And I'm reading right now. It's got a foreword. It's by Wim Hof. And it's just an amazing read, really easy and fun, and actually opening up my eyes to a lot of really cool, practical things that, like we talked about today, in terms of wellness and self-empowerment. So really excited about that. That's how we'll end out the month. And then we've got June's looking like it could be a power-packed guest month. I won't even drop any names right now. I did in the chat. So those in the D Live chat are lucky enough to see those names. But we still got to get them scheduled and stuff. But they're all said they want to come on the show. And some powerhouse names coming on here, brother. So really exciting. So everyone, thanks for listening today or watching. If you are on YouTube, this will be actually premiering at 5 p.m. today on YouTube. And you please support us with hit the like button, subscribe if you aren't subscribed yet, D Live, YouTube. You can join us on Patreon, join the co-op, patreon.com/Alfa Vedic. And of course, join us on Telegram, t.me/Alfa Vedic. We have an amazing community in there just talking all day long and all this stuff. We appreciate you guys. Alfavedic.com is where you can find out all the information. You can support us by buying products or joining the co-op. That's the best way to support us and help fund this operation. You can also come into D Live and drop tips in D Live. Download the Brave browser. You can get 90/10 products through our new affiliate link. There's lots of ways to support us and support your health in the same time. So thanks so much, guys. Bear, once again, really appreciate the hard work you put into that presentation. I think a lot of people are going to get amazing results from it. And yeah, everyone get outside today if you can and get your hands dirty, grow some food, get in your garden. It's really one of the best ways to connect to nature and also your emotional well-being. So thanks again, guys, and have an amazing day. Cheers.